All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the State of Customer Storytelling podcast brought to you by Testimonial Hero. This is the podcast that is all about helping you as a B2B marketing leader get the download on the most current practices related to all things customer storytelling. Today, we have a shorter solo episode with myself, your host, Sam Shepler. Quick background on me. I've been working in the customer advocacy field for about 6 years now, and I'm the founder of Testimonial Hero. And Testimonial Hero is the sponsor of this podcast. And, Testimonial Hero is a service that is the easiest way for B2B marketing leaders to create highest quality customer testimonial videos and other customer video content and micro content. So for this solo episode, I thought it would be fun to ask myself some of the common questions that I typically ask other guests on the show and then answer them, myself from my perspective. So I'll just ask the question as if I'm interviewing myself, and then I'll give my answer. All right. So to kick us off, first question, what's the big deal with customer stories? Why do customer stories really matter in B2B? So first and foremost, customer stories build trust and credibility. And everything starts with trust and credibility, right? If you don't have a certain threshold of trust, the lead is never going to convert in the first place, or it's going to get stuck in the funnel. And really, trust and credibility is the grease that keeps everything moving. Customer stories are just one of the best ways to make sure you have that trust and credibility. Even more than that, though, they're just often more interesting. They're more engaging. So, taking trust and credibility aside, there's just something about hearing from a peer that, versus kind of, hearing from a marketer or a sales rep, that we as listeners or as prospects, we get much more absorbed in a way that we wouldn't necessarily, with content marketing, right? From marketers. So, so first and foremost, they build trust and credibility. Second, they cut through the noise. Independent of that trust, it stands out because it's different. People are very used to getting messages from our marketing team and our sales team, have seen, ads and articles and everything. But, at this point, in many respects, B2B buyers are bombarded with that stuff. But when you can actually put customers at the center of your story, it cuts through the noise. So customer voice and the voice of the customer in that story cuts through the noise. Even if it's not, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in, a traditional endorsement, right? It's just injecting the voice of the customer in all your marketing materials, absolutely, stands out. And that's important because right now, it's noisier than ever right now, in all marketplaces, but especially in B2B. And then third, for, why do customer stories matter? Customer stories, matter because they can be a real competitive advantage. Think about it in this sense. So, your competitors can sort of copy your entire marketing site. They can really kind of copy your value proposition and the language you use, and they can copy your colors of your brand, and they can, if you're a software company, they can copy your features. They can, anything, along that line can be replicated. But one thing that, your competitors cannot copy is, your customer stories. So if you have a robust library of, really relevant, really accessible, authentic and, truly valuable customer stories and, video and other formats, that is in many respects a moat and a, differentiation and a competitive advantage, because again, a lot of things can be copied, but customer stories, they really can't. So that all those things, that's why customer stories Actually, that's just three of the top reasons. There's many, many more, but those are, probably off the top of my head, my top three reasons why customer stories matter so much in B2B. Building trust and credibility. They're simply more interesting. They cut through the noise, and then they are also a competitive advantage. Second question is, how have you seen customer storytelling change over the course of your career, and kind of what changes do you see? So one thing that I have really noticed, particularly in the past 2 years or so, is for customer content, we're really moving from let's say the olden days where it was way more about a monolithic content piece, and we're really moving to a whole much more snackable, atomized idea of content, and that's allowing prospects to really consume at their leisure throughout the entire buyer journey, and in smaller bites. So basically, it used to be somewhat more that like a customer video or a written case study was like a tactic that you used at a specific point in, later in the funnel. And now it really it's much more broader than that. And it's like customer content is just another content source. It's another medium. And I think the best companies are really injecting customer content and customer voice, especially through videos, throughout all stages of the buyer journey, right? So, everything is getting, more atomized, more snackable, with more focus on micro content, because that's just the way that we generally like to consume media these days. That's just kind of where most most things are trending. So that's the first thing I've seen change. We're moving away from this sort of like focus on like this big monolithic, like one and done situation, to more of a, full funnel approach, more of like thinking about it at a very broad strategic high level with customer content, and actually having like a customer content strategy. And really that is like, if I was going to draw a distinction between like the old days and current and the future, I would say like old days was like, what video testimonials do we need or something? Now, current, it's what is our customer video strategy? So it's less about, a specific tactical execution of like a testimonial quota, and more about, the strategy, and then, how do we best align with the strategy with all of the micro content that we need to support it. Well, less about the specific tactics, and the tactics are important, but like everything starts with the strategy. And so people are thinking about it much more strategically. At least the best marketing teams are. And with that, another thing is more. I mentioned the full funnel approach, right? That is another thing I think is changing. It used to be much more about checking the box at the later mid funnel around like, do we have our case studies to use in mid end of the funnel? And now it's more like, how can we, inject customer voice and customer content throughout the entire buyer journey, or throughout the entire funnel, right? So that I think is a big shift, and that's good for buyers, because that B2B buyers are driving that shift, because their buying habits are changing. They're, I forget the stat or the study, but it was a couple of years ago, and it was basically, the point was something like 80% of the buying process has been completed now in B2B before the B2B buyer talks to a sales rep. So essentially, this idea that people want to self-serve, buyers want to self-serve more. They're doing their own research. They expect to be able to do their own research and consume content at their own pace. And where in the old days, it was like people were much more willing to just get on a call, kind of listen to the sales rep. And it was, the sales rep honestly just had the power to straight up, persuade them easier. And now people buyers are way more educated about everything, because all the information is out there. And, so then as marketers, how can, if, and frankly, that's how I like to buy. That's how we all like to buy. Right. So like, how can we, give buyers the experience they want and let them actually consume customer content? And it's the answer is really, again, going back to that full funnel approach, is thinking at every stage in the buyer journey, what are the QFDs, the questions, fears, and doubts that at that stage, the buyer would want, and how can we address them through the voice of the customer, right? Because that's just so much more credible. So I think, that is a super, super important approach. So next question that I like to ask guests: if I'm a marketing leader, how should I think about setting a customer story strategy? What's the process to think through, or how do I actually go about that? So how do I set, how should I set a customer story strategy or customer content strategy? So this is a question I often ask, and have some awesome answers on this. I think that have really informed the way I think about it as well. So I definitely encourage people to listen to all past episodes, because I ask this question of almost every single guest. And my answer here is, which I think is pretty similar to some other folks, is it all starts first with aligning with, your go-to-market strategy and your, key strategic priorities. So you have to start from, knowing the strategy first at a high level in terms of like, your marketing strategy or your go-to-market strategy. And then only once, that is really clear, then you think of, all right, well, where do customer stories, customer content, support this? And, where essentially are the gaps, or, where are the gaps where like we're actually straight up missing, content, and we really need customer content, or else, the pipeline, we're just like, there's a block in our pipeline and we're just, it's really decreasing pipeline velocity. Or conversely, where can I, actually use customer content to just be an accelerant and really speed up the pipeline velocity? Because actually, in many cases, companies, don't have a lead generation problem as much as they have a pipeline velocity problem. If they actually, could fix their pipeline velocity, they could, you can stop worrying so much about, kind of stuffing unqualified leads at the top of the funnel. And one of the best ways to improve your pipeline velocity is to figure out where things are getting stuck, and then, understand what the questions, fears, and doubts from prospects are at that particular stuck stage. And then, figure out like, okay, how can I address this, through the voice of customers, right? Because again, as we talked about earlier, it's, more credible, and it also, really cuts through the noise, and it's just more engaging. So another thing that we can't not mention when we talk about strategy is, building out a sort of, matrix of different product use cases, as well as buyer personas, as well as, industry verticals. So, you can sort of think about this. You have your different use cases for how people are actually taking advantage of, your product. Then you have your different like personas, and then you have like what industry they're in, right? So like, ideally you want to, understand, and you can prioritize, you can kind of rank those, and you can prioritize, what's most important to you. So if like, based on figuring out, your go-to-market and your strategic priorities, if you know that, particularly the priority is X use case with Y persona in Z industry, then that is incredibly valuable, because then you can actually prioritize the customer content that is going to support that. But it really does help to map it all out. So that I think is super helpful. And again, it's not, incredibly complicated. It's really just asking yourself, do I have content do I have customer content to support all the use cases? all the personas and all of my industries, and what are my priorities within that mix, and understanding that can really go a long ways to realizing what customer content is actually going to move the needle for you, right? Because time is limited, resources are limited, and you want to create more customer videos, various types of customer content around the highest leverage stories that your rest of your marketing team, your sales team can actually use. So that's super important to think about. All right. So question 4, this will be the last question for this, mini episode here. How does one identify, which customers to actually, feature internally or like in the videos, right? How do you decide? So, first, obviously aligning on the strategy, as we just talked about that around, okay, like what is the persona and industry and use case demographic that I should prioritize based on my other stuff. However, in terms of actually figuring out who that is, there's a couple tips. First, once you know who that is, you can actually do some third-party review mining. So you may want to mine third-party reviews on sites like G2, Trust Radius, etc. For customers with great stories, right? Because customers who are leaving a good review, and also even more importantly, have a really interesting story in the review as well, good use case that aligns, that is a really good way to figure out who you should feature. Of course, there's also NPS score mining. So kind of similar idea, very similar. You can look at your NPS data, infer who would be great to feature from that. If you have a system for internal health score, if you track customer health score in your customer success platform, that can be a good data point as well. And then also, just kind of hand-to-hand, good old-fashioned meetings with, hand-to-hand combat, as they say, in terms of just like getting out there, talking to people. It doesn't all have to be automated. Sometimes you just need to, set a meeting with your customer success team and, get the conversation going, and, maybe in some cases your sales team as well, and try to figure out, based on what your goals are, who they think would be great candidates to feature. And then last and not least, check and see if you already have some built-in agreements actually with customers. So it's possible that you might have some customers who have already agreed to be featured, pending satisfaction as part of their sales contract. That is something that happens quite a bit in terms of if a prospect wants a discount, sales will come back to them and say, okay, we can give you that discount, but pending satisfaction, would you, assuming everything goes great, would you, do a case study, right? Would you be a reference, right? So just getting clear on like the people that have already agreed to maybe do a video testimonial or a case study, right? So, and I think also that is a key point. We often know who is available to do a reference, but we also have to, like a reference call or whatnot, but we also, as customer marketers and advocate marketers, have to be careful about managing reference burnout, right? So one of the best ways, in my experience, to avoid reference burnout is actually, as soon as it makes sense, capture that reference story in a customer video or a series of customer videos, a whole snackable micro content series. And then you're actually able to deflect the majority of those reference call situations, because after your prospect watches the customer content that you only had to record once, there's just really usually not a lot of need for the reference call, because 90% of reference calls, 95% of them, they're asking, the same questions, right? So it's pretty easy to kind of create something that will, you can do once and it'll work for the majority of situations, and you avoid the reference burnout. All right. So that is a wrap on the solo episode. If you enjoyed that, let me know. And as always, this is the state of customer storytelling. And we'll see you in the next episode.